One of the funniest panel shows of all time in the UK is Would I Lie to You? Trust us on this one. Created by Peter Holmes, the show has celebrated its 16th season and has been running for over 150 episodes. Particularly after Rob Brydon went from being an occasional panelist to becoming the host, the show has gone from strength to strength. With each episode, a regular cast of comedians, actors, actresses, hosts, journalists, and presenters tell their absurd anecdotes, making us wonder whether they're being honest with us or if this is just another lie. The friendly rivalry between the two team captains Lee Mack and David Mitchell is also one of the reasons for the show's long-term success. But what exactly are the moments on the show that have caused it to last so long? Facts Verse UK presents Funniest Moments of Would I Lie to You? Kevin Bridges buys a horse. If there's one anecdote that was tough to follow due to its utter absurdity, it was the story of when Kevin Bridges apparently bought a horse. Here's how it went down. Kevin and a friend of his went to Bulgaria for a lad's vacation. They figured it would be cheaper since the local Bulgarian currency wasn't as strong as the British pound. And yes, David Mitchell's team certainly asked Kevin to recall the name of the Bulgarian currency. Apparently, Kevin and his friends wanted to go horse riding in Bulgaria. But due to a communication error and a language barrier, a Bulgarian guy trying to speak English and two Scottish guys trying to speak English, he didn't just pay to go horse riding. He claimed he bought the horse. This is easily one of the more absurd stories told on Would I Lie to You, and the anecdote kept going on until even Rob Brydon got frustrated. The story seemed to go all over the place, and clarification after clarification were needed to find out if the story was true or a lie. What was the result? You'll have to see the episode yourself. Bob Mortimer's dentist. We'd need a separate video altogether for Bob Mortimer's absurd tales, which he shared through the years. But there's one which, if it wasn't Bob Mortimer, you'd immediately think it was a downright lie. Mortimer claimed to perform his own dentistry. He explained he'd lie back on a chair that his son used while playing video games. He then connected a mirror to the bow of an Indian stringed instrument to view his teeth. And he always uses the brand Fuji, which he claims is the best for doing your own dentistry. Now, from what we've told you so far, you're probably inclined to say it's a lie, unless you've made an appointment to get a root canal from Bob Mortimer. But knowing how Bob Mortimer tells such absurd stories, which almost always seem to be true, this just doesn't seem as ridiculous as it sounds. Once again, it's one of the funniest moments on Would I Lie to You? David Mitchell's breakdown when struggling to figure out whether Bob is telling a falsehood or is fiercely honest is worth watching on replay. Where is Henning Wehn? Henning Wehn has had very few appearances on Would I Lie to You, but they've always been so memorable you'd be forgiven if you thought he was a regular guest. One of his craziest stories is when he claimed to have been listed as a missing person by Interpol for 3 weeks in the 90s. He stated he was visiting Morocco on holiday and met a mysterious man named Muhammad, who he later referred to as Mustafa, and that he left without telling his parents. He had told his friend Mark about the trip, and Mark decided not to tell Henning's parents, thinking this would be funny. The story of how Henning met Muhammad and how he decided to carry his suitcase of books and how he decided to end up in Morocco is one of the funniest stories you'll hear. This set the precedent of knowing that in the mid-90s, Henning Wehn lived quite an interesting life. He was on Lee Mack's team, and David Mitchell's team were absolutely stumped. You'll have to watch it for yourself to see if Henning was telling the truth or lying. Lee Mack misses the royal wedding. Lee Mack claimed on one episode that he had been invited to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding, but had to cancel to appear on the episode of the show. He assumed that Rob Brydon and David Mitchell would have been interviewed since Prince Harry stated he was a fan of the show, but he hesitated to call them in case they hadn't been invited. David and Rob stated that neither of them had been invited. Both of them seemed angry that Lee Mack had been invited to the wedding and they hadn't. Richard Osman couldn't believe that of all the guests invited to the royal wedding, Lee Mack would be on the list. David Mitchell even stated he couldn't bring himself to say that it was true. Rob Brydon stated he felt it was true and was feeling uncomfortable, not wanting to hear the truth. And then Lee Mack was asked if it was true or a lie, and you'll have to see for yourself. Mel Giedroyc Snogged Who? On one episode, Mel Giedroyc claimed she had snogged one of the panelists or possibly Rob on the show. At first, the panelists weren't interested in inquiring whether it was true or false or trying to find out who it was. Eventually, after a lot of speculation on who it could have been, she revealed who it was. She then had to give a background on what were the events that led up to the snog. The panelists had to guess whether Mel did indeed have a snog with the panel member whom she mentioned. They even broke from the norms, and Lee Mack's team questioned the panelist if he could confirm or deny some of the details she discussed to determine whether it was true or a lie. Both of Lee Mack's team members thought she was lying, even though at the beginning Josh Whitcomb said it was true as a way to imply that she had snogged him. Lee Mack went with his team, but actually felt that she was telling the truth. Rhod Bisram goes skiing. Rhod Bisram was perhaps an unexpected guest on Would I Lie to You, but ended up being one of the most memorable. He claimed that as a young man he wanted to go skiing and study it, but he couldn't get access to the mountains, even though he was in Austria at the time. So what did he do? He stood on top of a car while his parents drove the car around a racetrack, and this is what helped him learn how to ski. The story couldn't be more absurd, yet it kept going with the panelist asking question after question. Yet Rhod told the story with sincerity and took his time to pace it until Lee's team had to guess. The response to Rhod's revelation was hilarious, and he's only been on 2 episodes so far, yet his anecdotes have been some of the funniest. Rhod Gilbert gets tapas. Another absurdly funny guest on Would I Lie to You was Rhod Gilbert, who had some of the most ridiculous stories of all time. But none could have been more absurd than when Rhod Gilbert claimed he sold his Nissan Micra in order to pay for some tapas. It sounds absurd, but he swears it was good tapas. He had gambas a la plancha, and he sold the floor mats for some patatas bravas. Now, this was such an absurd story, yet it was one which kept going until the panelists came up with an answer. If you want a great belly laugh, then watch this funny moment. Just make sure you aren't eating any tapas while you're watching. Who knows Lamboo? One mystery guest who came on one day was Lamboo, and Lee Mack's team had to guess who he had a connection with. Guz Khan, Claudia Winkleman, and David Mitchell all claimed they knew him. Guz Khan had the most absurd story in which he claimed that Lamboo would travel with him for work purposes. Apparently Lamboo would sleep in the same hotel room as Guz to protect him from ghosts. This is perhaps one of the best This Is My segments from the series, and Guz Khan is a guest whom we'll hopefully see again in the future. These are just some of the funniest moments of Would I Lie to You. We expect there will be several more seasons and many more belly laughs. And maybe, just maybe, David Mitchell will guess one of Bob Mortimer's stories correctly. Now it's time to hear from you. Are you a fan of Would I Lie to You? Do you think panel shows featuring comedians will continue to be a popular genre? Let us know in the comments section below.